welcome to this final session for the Retail Trust. I'm really pleased that they've invited me along to chair this panel with you this afternoon. My name is Marcia Hazard. I'm a consultant with Included. We are an impact-led diversity and inclusion consultancy. We've worked with over 500 clients across the globe and worked with over 20,000 employees. 200,000, I should say. Gosh, I'll get in trouble for that. On a personal level, I've been working in the leadership development, organisational transformation and EDI space for over 30 years. I know you're going to think I started when I was 10, that's fine. So, what is this climate of diversity and inclusion that we're now finding ourselves in? The world has seen some immense shift over the past 18 months. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted many things for us, a sense of our own and our planet's mortality, what we value in our lives, and the things that we don't value. And along with that, a heightened awareness of inequality. That inequality has echoed in the world events. We've seen the response to George Floyd's murder, the Black Lives Matter movement, increased awareness of our historical past and the realities of colonialism, Cecil Rhodes, Edward Colston, etc. An awareness of violent attacks upon women, the reality of the conditions in the care of our older people during the pandemic. I could go on. We've seen global retailers make public stances in response, such as Blackout Tuesday, statements about anti-racism, statements against misogyny. Again, I could go on. Large companies have made commitments to increasing diverse representation within the workplace, creating action plans to improve gender, ethnicity, disability pay gaps, debiasing their people management systems. But I pose this question to you, is that enough? The recent events in sports, the experience of racism amongst Black and Asian players in cricket and football have illustrated that diverse representation is not enough. We must build cultures within our organisations that are proactive in removing the barriers that hinder recruitment of diverse talents and underrepresented groups. A true understanding and commitment to the value of having a diverse workforce. There's much research about this. And that commitment must come from the top of the organisation. We need to ensure that there's equity within our people management processes, make adjustments where those processes might have an adverse impact on specific groups. A good example of this is our potential return to the office. Many organisations have proved that remote working is just not a luxury simply for the senior and professional roles. We've seen many other roles be able to operate perfectly effectively remotely. So think about, are the new plans for the return and hybrid working having a disproportionately adverse impact for women, for Black and minority ethnic employees, employees with visible or invisible disabilities, and so on? We need to put inclusion at the heart of what we do. We need to ensure that our leaders role model inclusive behaviours and that they have the skills to lead inclusively, that they can create a culture and sense of belonging for our people, that they can create psychological safety for employees so that they can express their concerns and report incidents of harassment. They need to give and receive feedback that is acted upon where that action is needed and provide intrinsic and extrinsic reward for creativity, innovation and good work. So I'm going to finish off with a couple of tips for the retail sector. Know your data well. Have a full picture of your organisation. Understand the intersectional needs of the underrepresented staff groups and support this data with qualitative information which you gather from your listening groups, your staff networks, your ERGs, etc. Recognise the nuances of your employee experiences. Ensure that your staff surveys measure not just satisfaction, but also the behaviours within the organisation that support inclusion. In terms of your strategy, be clear about how your EDI strategy aligns with the overall business strategy. This is not an add-on. Think about what being an inclusive organisation means, not just for your people, but for your customers and your product design. And be clear that being a more inclusive organisation is not just diversity, and that inclusion adds value to your business. So I'm now going to turn to my fantastic panel to share some of their own insights on this topic. And I'm first of all going to call upon Helen Dickinson, who's the CEO of the British Retail Consortium. Thank you.
I am, and I'm going to try and sort of
squeeze
dance around you. I don't want to be sitting on your lap, Marcia. I think everybody's going to have a harder and harder job because following what has just been said is going to be a bit of a challenge, but we'll see how we go. Isn't it joyous to be out talking to real people? It's so exciting. I was asked for a little bit of a title of this sort of 5-minute opening slot, and I thought about what it might be, and I wrote diversity, inclusion, and well-being, a no-brainer for every retailer, surely. So I thought I'd start with a question. I know you've had a bit of an interactive day and afternoon so far, but put your hand up if you disagree with the following. So it's if you disagree. More inclusive businesses are more diverse businesses, are more successful businesses, are businesses that have happier people in them. Anybody want to be brave and disagree with that as an opening statement? Well, I thought not. So it is a bit of a no-brainer then, isn't it? Well, I'll come back to that question in a minute because I'm not sure it is quite such a no-brainer. But everybody here is connected to retail in some way. Yes? So you can answer that one. Right, okay. So we love it, right? Yes, come on, we love it. Agile, innovative, flexible jobs for all sorts of people right across the country, often part-time, often for those that are managing them around childcare. One of the most important jobs for people entering their first step on a career ladder. Maybe they have no qualifications at all. And whenever you ask people about what is great about retail, they always talk about the people. It's the thing that differentiates good businesses from great businesses. So, if this industry is the largest private sector employer, and there are 3 million people who work in it, that's surely got to be representative of our society. And yet, the more senior you get in our great industry that we all love, perhaps the less representative it becomes. So I'm going to give you some statistics. So back in March, we did a piece of research with a consultancy, recruitment consultancy called MBS, and an advisory firm called PwC. I'm sure lots of you have heard of either or both of them. And the findings were that the industry is falling behind. So 20%, so 1 in 5 retailers have all male boards. 15% have no women on their exec committees. There are less than 6% of people in senior positions that are from ethnic minorities, and that compares to about 12% across the rest of the economy. And if you look across other things like sexual orientation, disability, social mobility, people don't even collect. Lots of businesses don't even collect that data. So you can't even tell what that looks like, but I expect we're going to see similar levels of underrepresentation. And there's also a bit of a disconnect between what people at the top think and what people who work in the businesses think. So 84% of executives report that diversity and inclusion are priorities for their organization. Yet less than half, 49% of employees, feel that D&I is sufficiently high up their agenda. So almost a quarter don't even have a formal D&I plan in place. And as Marcia has just highlighted, the backdrop of the pandemic, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the real focus on mental health at work with so many people in retail being in the front line. I'm sure you've heard in other sessions today about how the support that Retail Trust has been needing to give to those across the industry has gone through the roof over the last 18 months. That moment, perhaps, we're at a moment where we need to really focus on shifting that dial. And certainly from my point of view, I've been doing this job at the BRC for 8 years, or 9 or something, maybe 10, I can't remember exactly. But I can remember talking about this when I started. And I've been working in retail for even longer. We've been talking about this for like decades. So, although it feels like a no-brainer, it clearly isn't. And I think that maybe the backdrop of the pandemic has showed that there is a real opportunity, like now, on this to move that dial. And hopefully you are all part of that solution. Because I think from the point of view, I mean, I'm not even going to write, I've got some, it's like what employers are more engaged, we need our industry to be more diverse, more vibrant, to be able to reflect the customers that we're trying to serve. I mean, I don't need to convince any of you, I'm sure, in the room. And I think, one of the things that we've tried to do, certainly from a BRC point of view, is to mobilize more, because we've been talking about this agenda for so long. Maybe we need to move from that sort of discussion into actually what some of the practicalities of delivery really should look like, which is why it's great to hear what some of the thoughts that are going to come through the panel that we're going to hear in a minute. So that next step has got to be around action. And so from a BRC point of view, we're trying to mobilize, we've got over 65 retail businesses, probably many of whom are represented in this room, who have signed up to a diversity and inclusion charter that commits them to collecting data, which was one of the things that Marcia mentioned, but also to commit to having that leadership from the top, because I think that is one of the main success criteria, but also looking not only at their data, but at their everything from employment practices, recruitment practices, performance measurement, and how they actually operate day to day and engage with their people. So I think that this agenda is no longer a sort of optional, sort of nice to have. It's actually business critical. So if you're a retailer and you're not involved in the BRC Charter, then you should be. And I think that there's a real opportunity now for, whether it's through forums like this, through the BRC, through other networks, to really shift that focus from discussion to actually delivery. And that is, I think, the step change that we need to make, so that when all of you that are many decades younger than me are standing here in 10 or 20 years' time, you're not having the same conversation as we were 20 years ago, and potentially still are today. So that's my soapbox call to action. So now we're going to work out how to do it, and I'm going to hand over to the next person. In fact, we've got somebody joining us digitally, haven't we? So I'm going to let Marcia introduce our next panelist. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Helen. Really, and I think that's what it's all about, a call for action. So the next panelist we have is Kate Nash, OBE, who is the creator and CEO of Purple Space.
Really thrilled to be able to talk to you today about building disability confidence from the inside out. I have the very great pleasure of heading up Purple Space, which is the world's only network of disability employee resource groups and networks around the world. And we were set up in 2015 on the premise that we would only really start to see systemic change when it comes to the employment of people with disability, when individuals could start to recognise, notice and start to act on the fact that they have skin in the game. And crucially, if we start to put in place some mechanisms and techniques to support people to build their inner confidence, to feel able to share their experiences of disability, ill health, and crucially to network and connect with each other, not just employees with disability within the same organisation, essential as that is, but equally to support employees with disability across a multitude of employers, so they felt part of a growing unity and community about sharing their experiences. Of course, we know that there is still acute need for improved policy, practice and procedure. And yet the fact is that real change only happens when those people who are most impacted by challenge choose to lean in. and to notice they have skin in the game, and to make, I suppose, a commitment to support their businesses to do differently and better, as well as support those that come behind us. Because we see that in all people movements, only those people who are most impacted by challenge do we start to see real progress, real pace, and a real beat rate when it comes to change. So our work is guided by some of the principles that I wrote in a book, Secrets and Big News. It's a free resource, so don't go ordering it on Amazon, as much as we love Amazon. So do have a look at our website if you're interested in hearing more. But the purpose of the book was really to explore the reason why people sometimes feel reticent about sharing personal information about disability or neurodiversity or mental ill health, and the reasons why they share, the reasons why they don't share, and what employers can do to support people to bring their authentic selves to work. And this dynamic is often called the declaration of disability or disclosure of disability. It's not language that we would encourage employers to use, because it betrays perhaps a feeling that these are experiences that don't have a place within the world of work. And so, using the notion of disclosure might suggest that another person has a secret. Using the language of declaration suggests the experience is a big piece of news. And neither of those dynamics are altogether helpful in helping people to feel okay about the experience of disability and ill health. So the premise of the book, we had 55 employers take part, was that we need to start in a different place if we're going to support the process of people to feel good about who they are, good to bring their talent to the places where they work, and in helping them to feel optimistic and happy and part of the dynamic of change. And in that different place, it's about really noticing some of the deep-seated reasons why people find it really hard to share that personal information. So we know that most organisations, those of you in the room today, whether you monitor or not, whether you have monitored and your data is not looking overly healthy in terms of numbers, the reality is most organisations will have between 12 to 20% of their employees will have a disability, whether they choose to share that or not. And of course, Marcia, in her opening address, reminded us that so many individuals will have an unseen or invisible disability. So quite often employers, when they do monitor, maybe come up with data that suggests 2 to 3%, but as we know, the reality is much closer, between 12 and 20%, depending on the sector that you work in. So what's the reason? Why is it that we find it so hard to share information about one aspect, about many identities? All of us carry many different identities, and sometimes we choose to notice one or more of those identities at different points in our life. So the book, we showcased how the core reason is often fear of being pitied, one of the most corrosive of all human emotions, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear that our brand as high-performing individuals might be eroded, the fear that maybe asking for a workplace adjustment is asking for a favour, the fear that perhaps our identity, or by identifying with the experience of disability or ill health, will have a long-term and deleterious impact on our life chances and our ambitions and our career choices. So we decided to do something about it and to create a vehicle to drive the big ideas that we came up with. And I'm going to share with you just an invitation to maybe explore, debate, have a think, and maybe stretch these ideas in your wonderful places of work. First is to support your people to network, to surface their experiences, share their stories, breaks down isolation, builds a more realistic picture of your diverse talent, and it starts to normalise difference, supports people really to come out of the shadows. Secondly, consider setting up a disability employee resource group or business resource group, affinity group. They're called different things in different parts of the world and different trades. So when I started in this game 15 years ago, and the expression "the personal is political" was ever thus, a lifetime of experiencing disability and discomfort. But when I started to help businesses, global multinationals, to set up disability ERGs, I was often told that there's very little that binds our experiences together. And we're often told, well, we've tried and it just doesn't work. You know, we have a fantastic, vibrant gender network. We have a fabulous LGBT plus Q network that's cooking on gas. We have a really powerful and emerging BAME network. But we've tried disability networks and it just doesn't work, because what does somebody with arthritis have in common with someone with a vision impairment that has something in common with a mental health condition? And the reality is, although some of those practical adjustments in how we interface in the world of work might differ, the reality is, if you scratch the surface, the soft bigotry of low expectation will often run like a purple thread through our lives. Thirdly, never ever avoid getting into this agenda in terms of worrying about getting it wrong, the causing of offence, the saying the wrong thing, using language that is clumsy and lands in the wrong place. Of course, we have a duty to apologise, we have a duty to learn, and we have a duty to go again. But certainly in my experiences and the many hundreds of ERGs that we work with, being purposely inquisitive about what you can do personally to support the creation of a better working world is the way to go. Fourthly, consider making very simple changes to how you work. We all have a circle of influence, whether we are senior business leaders or not. So one thing, maybe perhaps always ask your team what you can do to make a meeting more accessible. And high five to you, the event organisers today, for making it easier for me as a disabled person to choose deliberately at the moment not to get too close to people physically. Secondly, start to think about how you might conduct performance reviews or objective setting reviews with your people. Maybe always make a commitment to say at the end of a review, what can we do to support you to get any adjustments that you might need? Even if somebody in front of you seemingly doesn't have a disability, never ever forget that 86% of all disabled people are those people who acquire a disability through the course of their working life. Believe me, that sentence, if you say it routinely, will lodge in their minds, and you will know that the business has real intent if somebody did acquire a disability later down the line. And then lastly, I suppose, look at what is in your power to nurture the allies. You know, the fact that you're all sitting in this room signals a deep and enduring commitment to want to build better and more inclusive and happier working lives. But think to yourselves about what you can do to lead the march in terms of allies programs. So as I finish and hand off to the next speaker, really commend the Work L State of the Nation report led by Lord Mark Price. It shows that employees with disability are likely to be less happy at work than other employees. And this chimes, of course, with numerous in-house pulse surveys. Worth time to consider those findings. And to summarise, actively listen to your people. Amplify the lived experience through courageous and creative storytelling campaigns. Find the ways of building trust through some of those practical considerations, and particularly to learn from your contemporaries. Tesco's recently launched their disability at Tesco Network. Forgive me, some years ago, they, led by the wonderful Jason Bates, it's now one of the most powerful employee resource groups within retail and has acted as a catalyst to plough back learning of their people in some of their customer-focused schemes. Body Shop gearing up for a massive launch of disability on the 3rd of December, International Day, and as part of the Purple Light Up celebrations. They're already blown away by how many stories they're hearing from their people who are so excited that the Body Shop is launching a disability network. And of course, M&S, one of the most capable employee resource groups operating today, the Buddy Network, headed up by Lorna and Connor, really surfacing the lived experience so that they too can plough it back into the customer experience. So thank you for your time. Handing off now. I'm still lurking in the background. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you, Kate. That was really insightful in terms of the role of allyship as well, which is something I didn't mention in my intro, but how important that is. I'm now going to invite Leon Donald, who is the UK Commercial Buying Manager and the DEI Ambassador for Tesco, who's going to talk to us about the Tesco Black Action Plan.
Thanks, Marcia. Good afternoon. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Leon Donald. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a part of the commercial team at Tesco. I've got 5 minutes to share 3 learnings from my mission to dismantle systemic racism. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. 2020 was an exceptional year, not least because of the global pandemic, but also because we were reminded of the injustice within society. The video of an innocent black man being murdered by a police officer was a devastating moment for the world to see. George Floyd's brutal murder also represented a tipping point. It reminded many of us of the injustices within the society and inspired many of us to be part of the solution to end the injustice felt by black people. As the UK's largest private sector employer, I'm proud to say that Tesco will be part of the solution to dismantle systemic racism. And today I'll share my 3 learnings from developing and embedding Tesco's Black Action Plan. Number 1, separating the black from the BAME grouping has helped us tailor bespoke solutions that speak to the pain points within the black experience. The challenge with the BAME grouping, it masks the issues that the black community face, such as anti-blackness, which refers to the dehumanisation and devaluation of black people. Number 2, equity of approach equals equality of outcome. A famous Plato quote says, "There's nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequal people." Treating different cultures the same only perpetuates the inequality that already exists within those groups. I'm going to use an analogy to help illustrate this point. Imagine there's 3 terrace houses. You've got, in the middle, a house which represents the black community. That house is burning down. We have 1 hose pipe. Logically, we'll apply the water pressure to the black house to extinguish the flames, to promote equality of outcome. And the 3rd learning, a powerful quote you may recognise. It says, "Consistency is greater than intensity." One of the key aims of our Black Action Plan is to embed an anti-racism culture, which sounds great on paper, but in practice, a little bit more tricky. One thing that's really helped my team at Tesco is embedding anti-racism reflections during our business meetings each week, and really helping ensure that our colleagues shift from being not racist to anti-racist. To conclude, systemic racism is having a disproportionate impact on the black community. According to the Office for National Statistics, the UK's black community has the highest rates of unemployment, the lowest rates of home ownership and asset accumulation. Also, black people are significantly underrepresented in leadership. The FTSE 100 has no black CEOs, CFOs, or chairpersons. And according to McKinsey, it will take 95 years for black talent to achieve parity. Ending the oppression of the UK's black community is not just morally correct. Our economy stands to benefit too, with an extra 1.3% in GDP gains, according to McGregor-Smith report. Before I close, I'll end on a quote from Martin Luther King, who said, "You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step." So today I encourage everyone to take the step outside of the comfort zone, to be part of the solution to dismantle systemic racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Some really powerful words there. And our last panel member, last but not least, is Hector Minto, who's the Director of Accessibility Evangelist at Microsoft, who's going to talk to us about the initiatives there.
Thanks, Marcia. It's great to be back out, isn't it? It's just lovely to look out again on an audience of people. My name's Hector Minto. I've been working in the field of technology for 25 years. But I joined Microsoft 5 years ago because we sit at an incredibly important moment of digital transformation. Society is changing all around us every day. Your businesses are changing almost daily in terms of the technology and the digital solutions that they provide. But if we don't systemically include the 1 in 6 people with disabilities on the planet, we're going to slow progress down. If you think about any experience, you have to ask yourself, who's missing? And even taking an amazing accessible event like this today, you could argue, well, is there wheelchair access onto the ramp? Are there captions routinely available in the meeting? Yeah? This is not criticism of the organizers. Please don't take it that way. Yeah? But this is the sort of learning and journey that we need to be on. We need to start asking ourselves, well, who is not here? And when we think of people with disabilities being 1 in 6 people on the planet, that's an incredible number of people that we're routinely, structurally excluding from the experience. And that's what accessibility is. Kate and I go back a long time. Kate talks about disability inclusion and disability voice. And my role within the Microsoft team is to tackle the structural exclusion of people with disabilities from the workplace. When we wake up in our team, every morning we're thinking about the employment of people with disabilities, the retained employment of people with disabilities, or the new employment of people with disabilities. And in a sector where we're looking at recruitment challenges, why are we ignoring this amazing talent pool to bring this talent pool to work for us? Disabled people take less time off. Disabled people actually, influence organizations massively in the way that they create change by recognizing their own routine exclusion. Who's been on a Teams call recently? Thank you. Okay, start off that page, okay? Anybody use the blurred background? The blurred background is amazing because it means that you can focus much more in that meeting. But it was developed by a deaf engineer who lip reads at Microsoft, bringing her lived experience to the design of the experience. How many of you have used the captions in Teams or the captions in PowerPoint? And how many of you have kind of been cooking while leaving the captions on in a meeting and thought, wow, thank you for that amazing experience? Yeah? Again, designed by our deaf colleagues, but actually leveraging AI in that experience on a daily basis. In PowerPoint or Teams, it reads your slides, it reads the vocabulary, and it optimizes the accuracy of that experience because people with disabilities will not put up with, please excuse this one moment of bad language, they will not allow what we call craptions in the disability world. Inaccurate captions are just not useful. So we have to start bringing people with disabilities into the experience to actually set the bar of accessibility and the bar of acceptability into that experience. At Microsoft, we have a fully funded accessibility team, as you would fully expect. Yeah? For years, we focused on the legal mitigation, the risk mitigation of being sued by excluding people with disabilities. It took us 20 years to put somebody with a disability in charge of accessibility at Microsoft. That was the moment where we actually thought, we will start actually doing things we want to do as opposed to things that we have to do. Doing things because you want to do them, driven by the representation of people with disabilities, is a far better approach. So I'm going to share a couple of parts of our plan and how we actually measure this progress and how we approach it as a business strategy. The first pillar that we focus on is culture. Unless people are being represented at the very top of a business, unless it's visible, unless disability is talked about regularly, we will continue to exclude it. So if you think about our town halls, what we call our CEO Connects, Satya Nadella stands right next to a sign language interpreter, and that is not just to support our colleagues who are deaf and have sign language as their first language, it is there to say, deaf people work here. Yeah? It's the messaging is just as important. Ask yourselves in the retail sector, how many people work with you who are dyslexic? How many people work with you who don't have English as a first language? How many people have lost their hearing or losing their sight through aging in the workplace? And how obvious is it that they work within your organization in the way that you deliver learning, training, people management, people connects? How visible is the routine inclusion of those groups? So culture is incredibly important. It took us 5 years, in my 5 years at Microsoft. We've now got to the point where every single Microsoft employee has mandatory training on accessibility. We went with that organic cultural growth first because we wanted to maintain, get that almost like that self-built momentum. But we've now got to a point where we're really confident to mandate it throughout the organization and make demands of everybody else. Whether you be in HR, whether you be in buildings, whether you be in IT, all of us can make commitments to the structural inclusion of people with disabilities. So the next part of our program is processes and tools. If you don't know if something is accessible or not, it's not. It's really that simple. If you don't know how accessible booking leave is, the training that you're delivering, the onboarding, if you've not asked that question, then it's not accessible. And you will be routinely structurally excluding people from those experiences, both digitally and in person. And the third thing that then leads to is more inclusive product. Guess what? If you celebrate disability, have an amplified voice of disability inside your organizations, you will just build better product. I was in Costa, there's nobody in Costa here, if you are, hello, not so long ago, and I was in the queue, and there was a member of retail staff struggling to speak to somebody who was very hard of hearing. At which point I jumped in with my Apple Watch. This will be the only time I mention Apple today in this presentation. And I put translator on, I set it from English to English, and I said into my watch, I said, okay, let me help you with this, we can just have live captions in the conversation. And immediately, that person was included in the experience. We worked out what coffee they wanted, we were able to get great communication going on using AI to essentially create text in that scenario. We need your product to represent that inclusive experience. Wouldn't you like to be a customer of any of your brands and be approached like that? Using modern technology, using modern tools, having awareness within your teams about how to proactively deliver an inclusive experience. Yes, we like gadgets at Microsoft. We like technology, but you all have products that you can build that actually represent the users, represent people, represent society at large. And that's where I'll leave it, which is innovation. We just delivered Windows 11, and the tagline was the most inclusive version of Windows, the most inclusively designed version of Windows ever delivered. And that's because representation is there within Microsoft. Our engineering teams are proactively recruiting disability talent into Microsoft to bring their lived experience to influence our product. And when you link representation to product, to sales, trust me, you will get amazing buy-in to the topic of inclusion. So it's incredibly important that we actually recognize the value, the real measurable value that diversity brings into our organizations. With that, let's go to Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hector. And I actually use the blurred background because I think it's a great leveler. Yeah, I'm sick of seeing all these fancy, cases behind. Let's all just start from a level playing field. And welcome back, Kate. So I'm going to ask you to have a think about some questions. I'm sure somebody's got some burning issues. We've got a great panel with so much experience here that we want to capitalise on before we go. But I'm going to ask a question just to open up the floor and get people kind of warmed up a bit. And really, I'm going to ask you, what are the first steps that a company can take to kind of creating a more inclusive culture? And right from kind of the shop floor right through to corporate level. I'm going to ask you, Helen, first, because you haven't spoken for a little while.
I've been overwhelmed by so much great and inspiration from all the other speakers. I think to pick up some of the themes that have come through from what everybody said. One area to start is about data, about measurement. I think everybody in some way has sort of said what gets measured gets changed. And back to my sort of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I think lots of people sort of talked about it and thought if we talk about it, then that enough will be enough to sort of generate that change. So I think collecting data, and you talked about, there's all sorts of, I call them lenses. I'm sure everybody's got different words. Leon talked about, the black experience, whether you talk about ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, disability, all of those. You talked about the intersection. So it's quite hard even to collect data. Go, well, that's easy. It's kind of not. It's like, what if you're a trans black woman? It's kind of like, which box does that go in? So working your way through that. So that's one of the things that we've been trying to do on the Charter. So I think that data is like really important, and trying to compare at least apples with apples and get retailers to compare with each other, because everybody sits there and goes, it's not here, is it? It's over there. It's not us, it's them. We're fine. It's like, it's all good. It's kind of like, it can't be all good. It's like we all think we're good drivers, and there's a whole load of shit drivers out there. So somebody's got to be getting it wrong, haven't they? So maybe we need to look closer to home. So data, and I think role models has been another thing that lots of people have talked about. So showcasing what's there, and I think this other thing about listening. So I don't know about you. I think Kate highlighted it beautifully, and so did you, Hector. You're just talking to someone with a disability. It's like, how do you do that? How do you not put your foot in it? How do you talk about to someone who's black and then sort of confuse them with someone who's another? It's like, how do I do that? Because I might offend you. And I'm just like, or when you get into sexual orientation, it's like minefield, isn't it? Really. And so the temptation is that you just don't go there. That's my temptation. I'm too scared. Don't want to put my foot in it. Don't want to offend anybody. Won't go there. So through all the, I've got examples of, what various retailers are doing. It's like focus groups, listening groups. That communication, it helps people sort of to work through overcome some of those barriers. So I think data, role models, and listening would be my starter for 10.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come to you, Leon.
Thank you. I echo your points, actually, but I think one of the views that I think is super powerful, and I'm going to draw on another quote, change initiatives are best led by those to which the experience belongs to. So one thing I would sort of highlight here is don't underestimate the value of employee resource groups. And in fact, they can be a great source of intelligence, but also in terms of developing and driving and leading inclusion strategy. So if we take the Black Action Plan at Tesco, for example, that has been set up by our black colleagues and supported by our non-black allies. But actually, when we've done that, we've been able to really understand what are the pain points holistically across the black colleague experience, the black supplier experience, the black community experience, the black customer experience. So actually, having the employee resource group and really giving them the power to affect real change and centering the strategy on their needs. I think that's probably the biggest thing I would draw attention to.
Thank you so much. Kate, any views on first steps?
Well, like Leon, I'm a huge fan of employee resource groups, and I was calling out the fantastic work of Jason earlier. It is true that it can be often harder, I think, in the retail sector to set up employee resource groups. And so, finding other ways, other mechanisms by which you can learn directly from your own people. So, of course, I'm a fan of employee resource groups, but of course, there are other ways in which businesses can routinely notice the lived experience of people with disabilities in the room. Hector beautifully called out that, great representation and good quality knowledge about what your people are going through leads to better product and innovation, and that too leads to a better bottom line. So, it's about feeling brave. It's about opening up conversations that are really hard. Disability, mental ill health, neurodiversity. These are not experiences that people would automatically invite into their lives. The texture of the political experience of disability is different, and I'm not a fan of pleading or special pleading. It's just, so many people can be derailed by that human experience, and it takes a wee while for them to make sense of what that impact is going to be in terms of the longevity of their career, stability to earn income, etc. So learn directly, set up an ERG if you can, learn from the fabulous ones that are out there. M&S, Body Shop I know is going to be brilliant, Tesco, there are others sitting in the room, and forgive me, that's the danger of not being in a room and seeing all your wonderful faces and knowing where you come from. But just some ideas there, Marcia.
Thank you so much, Kate. Hector.
I'll be quick because so many people have covered a lot of what I was going to say, but readiness or knowledge is critical. Get everybody to that baseline level of knowledge on the topic. Once you understand it, you get past the awkwardness pretty quickly, right? Yeah, and believe me, after 25 years working in accessibility, I still make mistakes on disability inclusion, or I still make mistakes on language for that person, as opposed to, overall training and knowledge. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. But then also, we operate what's called a hub and spoke model. Allow everybody else to be their own expert about how they can contribute to the journey. So if you think about accessibility, it's easy for us because I guess it's a little bit more tangible. It's like, are you designing in or are you designing out? Is how we think about it. But when at COP last week, I don't know if you noticed, but the person in the wheelchair was excluded from the event, right? Massive, huge problem for the government there. Yeah. What it was that they went through all the regulation, the risk mitigation, but they never actually tested with anybody in a wheelchair because they'd have told them in like 30 seconds, that wasn't going to work. Yeah. So this idea that actually allow everybody else to kind of make their commitments. The Microsoft booth at COP26 was the only one that was at wheelchair height. Yep. And it actually got picked up by the same delegate when they came into the thing. I did not demand that our events team made that commitment. Yeah? We have trained everyone to a level of readiness and knowledge within Microsoft where they actually sit there and go, okay, what can we do on this agenda? And that's actually, I think, how you get scale of change, as opposed to it living in one part of the business, it starts to kind of resonate through all parts of the business.
Absolutely, thank you. Some really great points from all of you there. And I suppose what I would add to that is, sometimes your organisation doesn't have the diversity there to even kind of have the conversation in the first place. And then what happens is you just get this homogenous view. So one of the things you need to do is kind of think about how you can reach out and partner with others. Because at the end of the day, yes, you're in competition to some extent, but actually this is, this is about a social change and the whole demographic of our kind of customer base. Hector's mentioned product design a lot. I think, we've got to think about what is it that we're contributing to this whole, waft of social change and the way that we view things as a society, as a world as well. So partnering up with others to kind of give you those insights. Delving into your communities, working with community groups to get those diverse views that you might need. Thank you. Okay, is there any burning questions out there? I'm kind of I wanted to sing then because it was like blinded by the light and it kind of, but I thought no, because actually you're going to think I can sing and I actually won't conform to the stereotype. Are there any questions out there?
I just wondered, and anyone on the panel, if you had any recommendations around how you encourage colleagues to come forward from those diverse groups. So I work for Paper Chase at the minute, and we are at the start of our ED&I journey, and we're often reaching out to colleagues to hear from them and want to hear and share their stories, but we struggle sometimes to get people to come forward, or we hit a brick wall because we don't hear back from anybody. We aren't a diverse group as a people team, so potentially that's one of the barriers in itself. So I just wondered if you had any recommendations or suggestions on things we could potentially do differently or trial to hear from colleagues.
Great question, thank you. I'm going to turn to you, Leon, because just in terms of the work that you've done across Tesco, and then I'll come to Kate.
Sure. I think one thing that's really helped within Tesco in terms of bringing colleagues forward to share their lived experiences is having almost D&I ambassadors who essentially lead and role model inclusion within their function. And they have their own sort of D&I NWT, so project teams, and within them there's a rich level of diversity, and essentially they lead a lot of the initiatives. So Diwali, they'll sort of find speakers for their function, they'll share those experiences. I think what's really important is finding those colleagues that are super passionate about diversity and inclusion and making a difference, and B, are happy to do the sort of emotional labour, because it is a bit of a challenge, and of course when we're asking volunteers to come forward, not everybody's going to want to do that, just because of the emotional toll it may take on themselves. I love it, I get a lot of energy from it, but I know not everybody is in the same boat.
That's a great point, actually, in terms of clients that I work with, where they're kind of rolling out the same people to every meeting, every committee. So that's really important. And really, suppose, looking at your surveys and how you can use anonymous feedback, there's a really good, interesting, in terms of your disclosure rates, in terms of ethnicity, sexual orientation, et cetera, in your workforce survey, How much disclosure do you get in your, not just you personally, but how much disclosure do you get in your employee engagement? So your satisfaction, dissatisfaction, what's the rate of disclosure of demographics within that? If there's a gap, it's not necessarily the only indicator, but there can be an indicator within that gap that there's not psychological safety. So people aren't able to express how they feel, and also to link that in terms of their demographic data. So that's just one thought. And then that gives you an avenue to investigate. Why don't people feel psychologically safe in terms of coming forward? Kate, anything to add in terms of getting people involved?
Yeah, I would suggest just trust that there will be people within the business who will notice the value in them sharing their story and wanting to support those that come behind us. So, trust that you will have people who, they might be a little scared about sharing their story, but they will ultimately know the true higher purpose of you inviting people to do just that. And we have a free resource on our website called Purple Stories, which is really a simple tool about how to frame your story of disability in a way that it lands. So it invites you to think about, what do you want people to think, to feel, and to do as a result of delivering your story. And people just love it because, ultimately, if we can do anything to support others to do things differently and better around us and build a better, more accessible, more elegant working world, then, what's not to love? So, I'd certainly encourage storytelling campaigns. We did start the ball rolling 6 years ago when we came off the stocks, but there have been some fantastic ones out there. The Shell Be Yourself campaign is wonderful. Be Completely You from Fujitsu. There are a multitude of business who just make it easier for people to share their stories. So the short answer is just trust that there will be people, as soon as you signal your intent, you want to make it easier for people to bring their authentic selves to work by sharing real stories. You'll be surprised. It'll just happen. It'll be magical.
Thank you.
Just quick.
Yes, I was going to know, sorry. I got confused there.
One other really quick thing is just explain why you're asking. And actually, when we say that, ask yourself why you're asking. Yep, because actually when, if it's just storytelling, yeah, that's one aspect of it, and it's good to kind of have this kind of moments to talk. But actually, if you're focusing on making progress or maturing on the topic as an organization, that's what colleagues want to see more than anything, is that it's not that day of the year where we celebrate this thing, yeah? It's actually, how are we making progress? So we never miss the opportunity to share new resource for employees, things like accommodation processes, new training available, et cetera, et cetera. So use the opportunity of when you're asking to also signpost what you're offering, yeah, in terms of what's in it for me, but also for them to understand that what you're trying to do is drive iterative change over time, not just celebrate a moment.
Helen, anything to
I suppose what I was going to say, I think is similar-ish to Hector's point, which is, if rather than sort of trying to extract something out, sort of if you create those forums for a broader conversation, then if people start to feel comfortable just engaging in the conversation, whether that's, anybody that's got something that they want to bring and share, or perhaps it isn't even, I would have thought just keeping it sort of really neutral in the early stages will, it starts you on that first step on the stairs that you don't know, you can't see the top of.
Thank you so much. I think I can sense that you're feeling the Prosecco calling you. So I'm gonna wrap up, and just wanted to say, please just see this as a start of the journey. Make connections, take that first step, has been said, and there is lots of resource out there. Included, we have a weekly newsletter. Lydia, my marketing manager, is here with me today. And it's free. There's no obligation. We don't kind of get involved in your lives. And so you just go onto our website, www.included.com, and you can sign up, and the EDI newsletter comes to you with all the kind of current topics and thought pieces every week. So thank you, stay blessed, and really thank you for being involved in this session with us this afternoon. And thanks to the panel.